Some listeners may find the following content life-changing.
The thing is that Jesus isn't religion. Jesus is life.
Broadcasting.
This is the devil's world. We don't live in God's world. So,
ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Uncomfortable Hour with Glenn Casey and Eddie Briscoe.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to episode 2 of The Uncomfortable Hour.
That was super creepy. I'm just going to put that out there.
Is it?
Absolutely creepy.
I feel like my voice kind of changes because of inflection.
What's up, everybody? This is Glenn Casey
From The Uncomfortable Hour. Yeah. So there's that. Your boy Eddie Briscoe, Glenn Casey, episode 2. And today we are talking about the infamous
House of Yahweh.
House of who?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. And so for those of the listeners that don't know what the House of Yahweh is, you can go to their website. I don't want to broadcast it because I don't believe in them. And you can read up all the screwed up doctrine for yourself.
It's really the House of Israel Hawkins, a.k.a. Buffalo Bill Hawkins, but he wants to run it under the guise of Yahweh so he can get as much riches and women as he possibly can, which most men do nowadays.
Yep, shout out to Joel Osteen for the same reason. But that's exactly right. I mean, this guy, you know, this story's been covered on Dr. Phil. It's been covered on Ricky Lake. It's been covered on several news channels throughout the country. House of Yahweh is located in Abilene, Texas, and it is a compound that is a cult. And it is led by Yisrael Hawkins, who he changed his name, as Briscoe said. He
Formerly known as Buffalo Bill Hawkins.
Right. Buffalo Bill, which is kind of, I don't know. Anyways, you know. It is what it is.
Now he's the Great White Buffalo Bill.
The Great White Buffalo Bill.
Y'all will understand that later on.
Yeah. And not to be confused with Caucasian Bill. It doesn't have the same ring to it.
It does definitely does not.
Right. That's what we're going to get into. This is going to be a 2-part series. For the first part, we have an individual that we are interviewing today by the name of Kepha, and he is a 20-year elder that was involved with the organization who left in 2008, I believe. Is that right? Keep me honest.
That is correct. Actually, he left in 2000, as he's described, 2007, 2008 area. After the 2006 apocalypse doomsday prediction was debunked or did not come through.
Right. And that was the Nuclear Baby, a book by Yisrael Hawkins that he wrote, clearly false, that was the end of the world. And that's really how this false prophet gets his congregation and has become worth millions. He is a multimillionaire who has several houses and property and different businesses that he has built around the House of Yahweh in God's name. And what he does is he preaches fear. He constantly preaches of the tribulation and proclaims that him and his brother were one of the 2 witnesses that were mentioned, I believe, in the book of Daniel. And that he knows, obviously he doesn't, but that he knows when the day is going to be. And as long as you're involved in the compound, then you will survive the tribulation and no harm will come to you.
Provided that you buy all his generous snacks and groceries at 500% markup of actual retail.
100%, because he has a gift shop, he has a grocery store, he has multiple organizations that are actually located on the compound where people will be forced to buy from. There's been reports of child slavery. There's been reports of polygamy,
child molestation,
all different types of reports that have been filed that have come out of this corrupt, false prophet organization. And And it just continues to go on. I believe that he's still there today. It's down a private road. Anyone can go and join. They have what they call the feast. And so you can go and you can kind of see what it's all about. You can, go join there, and eventually over time, maybe you too will be brainwashed. Because that's, ladies and gentlemen, that's the way that this works, right? And for anyone that's listening, I'll say this, because there's millions of you listening. And by that, I mean maybe 5. Maybe 5 of them.
Maybe 4.
Okay. All right. That's probably a little bit more accurate. But
shout out to Edwin if you tune in. That's number 4.
Shout out to Rebecca, my wife. That would be number 3.
And my dad. My dad will actually tune in. So that's 2. So let's carry the 1. Yeah, we're still down to 4. We got 4 people.
Well, maybe my dad. Maybe. If he's not golfing, he might be listening.
My nephew's definitely not going to listen.
Okay.
100% for sure. He's not going to listen.
And that's the truth.
And that's the sad truth. And that's what you're going to get here. The sad truth. Or whatever truth you decide. Whatever adjective you decide to put before the word truth, that's what it's going to be here. The truth is that Israel Hawkins is a man who has been called psychotic, narcissistic. He is a sociopath, whatever you want to say. He's got 44 acres on his compound, property in which he's purchased and then actually resold, along with housing, along with campers, along with RVs that he uses. He sells them at a 500% markup, like he does all the food on the compound, all the groceries, snacks, his ready-made food at the deli, whatnot, all of those things. Of course, I've never been there, so I can only tell you what I've been told, and I've been told this by different people. There's been several different sources that have said this. And later on, we're going to have one of the biggest sources out there, and his name is Kepha. He is, like he said, an elder. He started out as a deacon, worked his way up to as what they call a kahan, which is an elder, and he was very close to Israel Hawkins, and he's going to go ahead and shed some light on the situation, talk about it, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more insight on what's actually happening up there, because it is actually still happening right now.
Absolutely. Just to give you a little bit of background, Israel Hawkins has been quoted as saying things such as global warming is caused by STDs. That's right, you heard it. Global warming, just in case there are people who are not educated, is caused by STDs. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was just like your face, everything all together was just a combination of happiness. I had to laugh. It was just funny.
And here's what I say. If you've ever been with somebody who has an STD, you can look them in the face and say, you have global warming.
You have global warming.
And I'm staying away.
It is manifested as herpes, the gift that keeps on giving.
Your ice caps are completely melting.
It's out of control.
I'm out.
There are some stranded polar bears down in and around your special area.
Polar bears.
You know what? I said polar bears because I want to see if you'd catch it. Just like I said circular in the last one. I want to see if you'd catch it. And you did. So there you go. I'm proud of you.
He's also been quoted as saying that Satan is a woman. And though I'd be inclined to agree at sometimes, before I get in trouble out there, definitely Satan is not a woman.
Absolutely not. This is a disclaimer for all the women out there. We do not believe and or endorse the meaning and or saying Satan is a woman. We don't believe that at all.
We don't. And even though sometimes you may possess... Okay, never mind.
Whoa,
Just
easy
kidding.
there. I don't believe anything.
Easy.
The views and opinions out of Glenn Casey are not necessarily the views and opinions of Briscoe. I do apologize.
Hey, just come on before y'all get too crazy. Just kidding. But yeah, there's been reports of girls that were trained for marriage at age 12. At age 12. Israel Hawkins himself has said that a woman is developed at age 12. And so these are the types of things that have been uncovered in that compound. Really grossly just inaccuracies of the Bible and complete perversion of the doctrine because this man is a complete false prophet and definitely in it for money and power. And I think that's what keeps feeding his ego is that he's got what I think Kepha said it started with 150 members or something around that when he joined.
Correct. Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yes. And now he's roughly in around 100,000 worldwide. He is a multimillionaire. His last net worth, before they actually stopped showing gold, because a lot of his cash flow is actually just cash flow. He is right around $33 million right now, as far as his net worth goes. His properties, everything all together. And he owns so much property in and around the compound that it's insane. He basically owns the whole county.
Yeah, and really a lot of it too. He's got like four houses that I have heard mentioned. Who knows if he has more that are really like mini mansions. You can look them up.
Shout out to Joel Osteen.
Yeah, shout out, buddy. Keep collecting that offering. Yet the congregation lives in RVs and trailers and just live in complete poverty, as you will find out. Complete poverty. To a state where really it's sad, malnourished, not taking care of hygiene. Things of that nature. He did write a book. He's written several books, and by that I mean Israel Hawkins kind of rewrote his own version of the Bible, if you will. Mm-hmm. And Nuclear Baby was one that I mentioned earlier, where he claimed a certain date that is far surpassed. A third of man will die, and it'll be by nuclear war in or around the Euphrates River. So. Pretty sure that hasn't happened yet. If you've been tuning into Fox News or anything like that, it has not happened.
It may have happened. I did have Taco Bell. I'm not quite sure if it's happened yet.
Whew. Man, this is going to be a long, long episode.
We're in a box with no AC.
Zero AC, just in case you're wondering. I mean, I'm sweating. I'm sweating over here. And by sweating, I mean I'm flexing too. What's up?
Whose fault is that, Casey?
Sometimes the engineer is not really an engineer at all.
Sometimes he wears his little striped hat, but he has no trains to push.
Things such as former members were required to give 10% of their earnings, right? Briscoe, what do we say about that?
Well, he does make sure that they tithe their 10%, which is, of course, one thing in the Bible that God says, test me on this.
But let me just make sure we're clear. Free will. This is a requirement, though, on that compound.
Absolutely. But that's only a requirement for the 10%, because they also have what they call second tithe, which is something that they actually ask in addition to the original tithe. And then, of course, what he does when people don't tithe, just to ensure that he does get that tithe, he does open his grocery store. He does open his stands. He does sell food to his own people, and that he does it at about a 500% markup.
When I think they're making somewhere around $20 to $25 a week. So that's what we kind of mean by a lot of the slavery too that's going on there, which is obviously well below minimum wage and illegal.
Which is, it's a lot less than you can live on usually. I mean, in my opinion.
Pretty sure my former job paid me $25 a week.
I'm gonna say I'm relatively good with money, and I don't think $25 a week's gonna go ahead and work for me. I'm just putting that out there. Right. Even without Starbucks, even without random acts of goodness, as far as my stomach's concerned, I don't think $25 a week's gonna work for me.
I don't think so, and I didn't get a chance to ask if Israel did a 401k match. Did he do a 401k match?
As far as I know, he did not do a 401k match. He does not offer any type of Roth IRA options, any type of stock purchasing options. He also doesn't offer health care, dental care, vision, or anything like that. But he does offer a really, really efficient midwife service where if you're actually pregnant, which most women are on that compound from what I understand.
By him.
By him or people who know him or whatever. You could just check for the people with the global warming in their crotch area. Either which way, these people, there's been several women have had extreme medical, I'd say, difficulties. Some women have died, and it's because he has a midwife service. He actually has a doctor that's super down for his cause and stays on there and helps people out. But Israel, who is not himself a doctor, does actually practice like medical procedures, and he does actually examine people for medical care.
Yes, so there's all of that. And this is a 2-part series, okay? The second part, we will interview his ex-wife.
Can you call it a series if it's only 2 parts?
I feel like it sounds legit.
It'd be like a mini series.
Yeah, kind of like a Stephen King type deal.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Right. You ever seen that movie, The Shining?
I did see The Shining.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. And did you see the new It?
I did not see the new It. I saw the old It.
The new It is definitely legit.
Was the old It a miniseries?
It definitely was not. What about The Stand? The Stand was definitely a series, and man, was it legit. And if you get tired of the word legit, then don't listen, because it's legit.
That's coming out of his mouth all the time. He says legit like I say definitely. But I will say this, though.
Definitely.
He needs to bring back his point. He needs to come back around and say why he brought up Stephen King.
So the reason why I brought up Stephen King was because we are doing a mini-series, 2-part series, and it's probably better than Stephen King.
Do you see how deep his voice got, everybody?
I got a little closer, too.
It got voiced, deepened.
It's like that movie guy voice, right? We are doing a 2-part series.
That's not an effect, everybody. That's actually his voice.
Is this scary? Yisrael Hawkins.
All I'm saying is this. This is my biggest issue with this whole show. If a kid goes to the sewer, loses his boat, and a clown pops up and says, here, take it.
Hiya, Georgie.
Any kid is going to run for their life. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll get back on track, but that is just ridiculous. No kid in the history of the world says, oh, yeah, I'll take my boat, little sewer clown. That's not going to happen. Sorry.
I feel like he's definitely telling the truth, because I know if I saw anyone in the sewer trying to offer me something, I probably wouldn't want it anyways, just being real. At that point,
unless it was a Ninja Turtle. If a Ninja Turtle was offering me pizza, I'd probably take it, bro. 100%.
Now, see, that would have been a little bit more realistic, because, look, if Raphael said to me tomorrow, I'm going to give you some nunchucks, something like that. I don't even know if that was his weapon of choice. But if I'm going to give you this weapon, if you come down in the sewer to get it, I would probably have done it.
I'd like to point out that he did know that that was his weapon. I just Googled it, and yes, that was Michelangelo's weapon. He was clearly...
I said Raphael.
You said Michelangelo.
No, I did not.
You did.
When we hear this, you'll see. In the
I'm going to tell you right now. You are a fan of teenage whatever they're called. Now, I can't even remember.
You are a fan of trash.
It doesn't matter, bro. It doesn't matter. Either which way, pineapple and onion pizza, I'm taking it from a Ninja Turtle.
Well, that's great, especially if it's in New York City. Know what I'm saying? Pizza.
Is that where they live?
I feel like that's where they live.
Okay.
I mean, it wouldn't make sense that they would be living in Nebraska. In the sewers.
That would be so boring.
Because the sewers in Nebraska
They're cow tipping. Let's get them, guys.
Right. The sewers in Nebraska are on top. They're not. Just kidding.
This is not made to offend anybody in Nebraska. We have no idea if there are cows in Nebraska. I'm just saying.
And we have no ideas if there's, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in your sewers. But if there are, that's pretty cool. It puts Nebraska on the map. Shout out to the Cornhuskers. I do want to read this, though, because I feel like this is important. It's very important. John chapter 14, verse 6. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, then you would know my Father as well. So as long as you kind of keep that in a perspective. I don't know what a lot of different cults, as you will, or different churches, for that matter. I don't know what they're teaching. But, read the Bible for yourself. Understand it yourself. Don't take another man's version of it or perception of it. Make sure you do your own research so that you yourself can form your own opinion and perception on it.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we will now get into the over-the-phone interview with Kepha. Hey, Kevin, this is Glenn Casey and Eddie Briscoe. How you doing? Uncomfortable Hour.
Doing all right, man.
Very good. Can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me? I'm driving, so I may get into a little. Hopefully, I won't get no bad spots. I'm trying to head back home.
That's fair. We'll do the best we can. Well, Kepha, I've got, like I said, I appreciate you doing this interview. I really do.
No problem.
I've got my partner in crime with me, Eddie Briscoe.
How you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing all right.
And obviously, you know why we're calling, and we wanted to, get a little brief introductory here going and talk a little bit more about what we're going to be getting into.
Okay.
Which is, of course, the infamous House of Yahweh out of Abilene, Texas.
That's it.
So let me just do this first, Kevin. If you can go ahead and tell us, what was your position there And how long were you affiliated with the House of Yahweh? Kind of how'd you hear about it?
I joined in '87. I left 2008. So I was there for 20 years, 21 years.
So
don't ask me how I stayed there that long, but I just did.
I gotcha. So if I could ask you, sir, this is Eddie Briscoe. So what drew you to the house? What exactly drew you to the House of Yahweh? What was the motivation?
Like I said, I joined in '87. You did ask me about positions. What they do is let me kind of go back, just backstep a little bit. Positions they give you, they do what they call ordinations. They ordain people to be deacons, and then of course elders are the ones that are supposed to be kind of what would be called, now they call them priests, which they're trying to reinvent the Levitical priesthood, but the elders are the ones that were there to counsel and to guide the people in the scriptures, and make sure they live in a scriptural life. So I joined in '87. I became a deacon around '88, and then I became an elder in '89, and then I was a judge in '91. So I kind of worked my way up all the way to the top, I guess you could say. Not that I was working my way like a job, but I just, I came there seeking truth. Now that gets to the second question, is what brought me there. I had been born and raised in New Orleans. I was born basically into the Catholic faith, like most people there. And I think I was around 11, 12 years old. My mother kind of went through a religious experience and started going from church to church. So we started going to Baptist church, because I don't really remember doing much in the Catholic church. In fact, I don't remember ever going to Catholic church unless I was going with a friend or somebody. But at around 11, 12, 13, we started to go into the Baptist churches, and then my mother found out about the Seventh-day Sabbath, so we started going to Seventh-day Adventist churches. And after that, she kept searching and, seeking truth, trying to find more and more of the truth. And the more she read, the more she realized, well, this church wasn't really fitting the bill. So we jumped around to many churches up until I was about 15, and then I went and lived with my grandparents. At that time, she called me, maybe a year or two later about, not that she wasn't talking to me, we were talking, but she went through another experience where she got involved in what is called the Sacred Name Movement. The Sacred Name Movement is a movement that was started back in the 60s, maybe the late 50s, where people were looking for Old Testament teachings. They were keeping the Sabbath, and then they found that the name of the Creator was Yahweh. They started calling Jesus Yahshua, and they were looking to keep the laws and the Torah that the Jews call the Torah. So what happened was they created their own little movement, which kind of expanded across not only the United States, but it's all over the world now. It's not a big group. I'd say maybe there's 100,000 Sacred Name believers in the whole world. But my mother told me about the name Yahweh and stuff, so I went and researched it and checked it out. And so I never did go to any of the feasts, because what these Sacred Name Movement people do, they keep their holy days. They keep the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Trumpets, which is Rosh Hashanah in the Jewish terminology. And, they keep Yom Kippur, which is Day of Atonement. They keep Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So I didn't experience that until I never did go with my mother. She kept wanting me to go, and I was getting literature from several groups. There was one out of Bethel, Pennsylvania, called the Assemblies of Yahweh. There was some in Rocheport, Missouri, called the Assemblies of Yahweh and Messiah, and there's a bunch of them. Down in New Orleans, where I was living, there's actually a group they called IDMR, the Institute for Divine Metaphysical Research, and they keep the Sabbath and stuff like that. But bottom line is, by '87, I had a spiritual awakening. I realized that I had a couple of little children, and I wanted them to follow, scriptures as best as I could teach it to them. So I wound up getting an invitation to come to Texas to the House of Yahweh from a friend of mine, and I'd never heard of him because I'd heard of the other sacred name groups, but I'd never heard of the House of Yahweh. So when I went, they hooked me, you know. They had everything I was looking for. They had people my age. At that time, I was 27. They had young children like me. So it was a really family environment. People were just really, when you came in, they treated you like you were a brother and sister. They called you brother and sister, and
Kepha,
you know
Let me ask you. Back in '87, about how many members would you say were attending the House of Yahweh when you joined?
I'd say there was probably about 150.
Okay, and so let me ask you this, because in the beginning, I think that the intent was right for the House of Yahweh.
It was.
And so in the beginning, there was no signs of any foul play or any false prophecy or any of those types of teachings. That was something that came later that morphed.
Let's put it this way: the leader and the pastor, Yishmael Hawkins, his psychosis was not evident. I call him, I've researched it enough. I feel like he is a sociopathic, narcissistic, psychotic personality, and it wasn't evident back then. In other words, he had a wife. His wife kept him in check. They hadn't instituted polygamy yet, so, you know, he was pretty much kept under wraps by his wife. And even though he was already psychotic because you're born with that, you know.
Right.
It wasn't evident because, you know, it seemed like we had elders and that everybody worked together. You know, it was just a really great family environment. I mean, it was probably the best times of my life. I've never experienced anything since then like that. You know, the camaraderie, the closeness, the brotherhood, the spiritual teachings. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, it was really something that grew. I mean, we went from 120 people, and within 5 years, we probably had 1,500 people coming to the feast, from 120 to 1,500. You know what I mean? We had to build a new facility, and they moved out the country, and that's when things started to go a little weird, you know?
Yeah, explain to me though how the community worked. I mean, when you moved there, where were you living? How did the housing and all of that? How was that set up?
Well, when I moved there, I had my own house, but what I did was I put it on some property of one of the brothers that was a member, and he wound up selling that property to the House of Yahweh, to Yishmael Hawkins. And Yishmael, of course, told me I could stay there. He, you know, said, don't worry about it, you know, and I built the house, and he said, you know, don't worry about anything, you know, everything's cool, you're welcome, you'll stay here the rest of your life, you know. So I wound up building a house there on property I didn't really own because it was church property, right?
Right.
So that's how much faith I had in it. I felt like wasn't going to go anywhere. I was really caught off guard with that, you know. And so my housing, I lived there. I built my own house. It was my house, but I was on church property. Other people lived around the House of Yahweh church, if you want to call it, because they had 44 acres. And a lot of them moved in town. So people had their own dwellings. Now, other people who worked for the House of Yahweh, Yishmael Hawkins would set up housing for them, like RVs and just, you know, nothing fancy, you know what I mean? He'd get some mobile homes, set them up and rent them to them. So at the time, most of the people were either renting from him or, you know, had their own property. What happened about maybe 10, 15 years into it, let's say 96, 95, 98, he started to get into real estate. You know, in other words, he was buying property and then selling it to members because they were telling people, you know, come here, you need to come to the House of Yahweh, the tribulation's coming, get ready, you know. So he was buying property, let's say $1,000 an acre, and selling it to them for $5,000 an acre. Or he would buy a mobile home for $500, fix it up, and sell it to them for $20,000, you know. So he started to really rake in the cash when he started to do that. And, of course, all the labor was free will offering. People were working for the church, thinking they were doing this for the House of Yahweh, but, you know, Yishmael Hawkins was the one that was profiting all the money, you know.
And he's a multimillionaire now, is that correct?
Oh, golly, I've heard he's worth $300 million, man.
Wow.
Unreal. So let me ask you this then, because, you know, obviously you kind of came in at a time that it was more or less beginning and it grew.
Yeah.
And you obviously brought your family there. You said you had two children, right?
I had my wife and my two children at the time.
Okay, and so there have been reports that, you know, and this probably came way later, but there have been reports of child slavery and things like that going on. Is that something that you can attest to?
Well, yes, in one way. In other words, what they did was the laws of marriage and slavery were put out, and he wrote a book on it, showing where a man could have more than one wife. So they introduced polygamy, and then
When was that?
that was right around 93.
Okay, so that was kind of the first red flag then at that point. Am I right?
Well, you know, I was the one that gave the sermon because I was an elder. And so he gave me the honors of giving the sermon, right? And, you know, to everybody in the organization, at least to most of them, we wanted to keep Yahweh's laws. You know, so if Yahweh said a man could have more than one wife, you know, there's many examples in the scriptures of men that did. You know, we didn't, you know, don't get me wrong. Some people didn't like it. Some people left. But most people just, you know, after they read the book, they realized, well, there's nothing wrong with marriage, multiple marriage, and there's nothing wrong with slavery because the way slavery is put up forth in the scriptures, it's like adopting someone into your family. You know what I mean? It's like having a hired servant, but you're not paying them. You're actually adopting them kind of into your family. You know what I mean? In other words, they stay there. I guess you would call it like modern day welfare recipients, you know? Instead of the government helping them, you would help them, but they would be your servant, you know? Now, in this case, each member didn't have the slaves. The house of Yahweh had slaves. So in other words, Yisrael made them slaves to the house of Yahweh. In other words, they gave their life to the house of Yahweh. They quit working, and they started working for the house of Yahweh, you know, making $25 a week or whatever, just, you know, food and clothing and electricity, whatever, you know what I mean? They lived on the bare minimum, in other words. And what they did was they worked for the house of Yahweh, which the house of Yahweh is Yisrael Hawkins. So they worked for Yisrael Hawkins, basically, and that's how he got what you would call the slavery thing going. So in other words, you wasn't just a slave to anybody. You could only be a slave to the church. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so that's...
then, you know... So I guess what I'm trying to get at too is that, you know, when did, and number one, if you don't mind, how did your wife feel about the polygamy enacted?
You know, my wife didn't like it, but at the same time, because it was being introduced, which I did take a second wife when I was there. So she had to, well, let's put it this way. She either had to accept it or she would have left. And she didn't leave, so she accepted it the best she could. And me as a, you know, I was trying to be a righteous man. And
Sure.
I tried to be fair with both of them and equal in the fact that, you know, we didn't have no menage a trois, wasn't no kinky sex. I mean, they each had their own house. I never kissed one in front of the other. I didn't even hold hands. I didn't show no affection in public. You know what I mean? So that way they would be, you know, try to keep any jealousies to a minimum. So, you know, it wasn't a bunch of kinky, weird stuff, at least not with me, you know. I was trying to do it as respectful as I could. And, you know, at the end result of it, it did break up my first marriage to my first wife. I'm still married to my second wife, and we've got 7 children together through the years. You know, we've been married now for 22 years. But when I took her as a wife, I didn't legally marry her. I just took her as I guess you'd say, a common law wife.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because how does that work within the church?
Right.
That's what they do. They just don't get a marriage certificate, and therefore they're not breaking any laws of the land, you know.
So who would marry you?
Well, the elders would marry them. Like me being an elder, I could marry people. The other elders could marry them. You know, when I left, we probably had, probably 50 elders, you know.
Sure. And so, you know, everything in the house of Yahweh was kind of in the house of Yahweh. So did you have any communication with the outside world at that point? What was that like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I worked out in the world and had a business and stuff, a construction business. So it wasn't like we were cut off. In other words, you know, I had a car, I had vehicles, You know, I paid my tithe. Now they do what they call a first tithe, a second tithe, and a third tithe. So, you know, a lot of people put a lot of money into the organization through tithing, you know.
So, yeah, I was reading about the tithe thing. So everybody is definitely required to do at least the minimum of 10%.
You got to do 10%, and then the second 10, which is called the second tithe, that's money is delegated for you to go to the feast and keep the feast. But what they do is at the end of the year, any excess tithes they have to give it to the house of Yahweh. So he wound up doing it to where when you first started keeping the feast, you could go out to the grocery and buy groceries. Well, over about, I'd say from about 2001 on, he started setting up his own grocery store and his own everything, you know. So where now you can only use that second tithe to buy from the house of Yahweh. So therefore he was getting all the second tithes too. Because he would mark stuff up. Like he'd go down to the store, buy a loaf of bread for $2, and at the feast he'd sell it for $5, you know.
Wow.
He opened up his own restaurant, so the restaurant during the year, you know, you can buy a hamburger for $5. Well, during the feast, the hamburger was $15, you know. So he would jack up the prices to make sure he would get that second tithe, you know what I mean?
Wow, that's insane. I can't believe that nobody in the organization complained or there was no type of movement. I mean, for people especially who are making the bare minimum, the slaves, so to speak. I mean, how did they get their rightful due? How were they able to participate in these feasts? What was their function?
It's like the frog in the water, you know. You sit the frog in water and you turn up the heat. You turn it up gradually. The frog, you can actually boil a frog because the frog doesn't realize the heat's being turned up. And that's the way I kind of say what happened with us is that you're there, you start investing like me, I moved there, I sold all my property, moved from Louisiana, and I had a lot invested in that place. You know, I had invested in, you know, my whole life into that. So you start, if you question anything, you know, they always had an answer for you. You know, they'd have a reason to explain why they did stuff. And it always appeared, you know, it just caught you off guard. You just eventually either bought into it, you know, like the second tithe, you know, when they said it had to be, you know, just through the where you bought from the house, you know, they had some reason to explain why they did it that way. And they brought in some scriptures. And I mean, they're a master manipulator of scripture. You know, they can take the scriptures. It's kind of like the Bible says, they twist it to their own destruction. That's exactly what happened in the house of Yisrael Hawkins. You know, it's basically taking the scriptures and twisting it to the member's own destruction, not him, because he's profiting big time.
He had a lot of false prophecy clearly going on, but it feels like he was leading his congregation by fear and constantly preaching about doomsday. And so I would imagine that would ignite fear in a lot of the congregation to stay.
Of course, yeah. You know, nuclear war is coming. I mean, all religions.
Did you ever, because, so Yisrael Hawkins claims that him and his brother were the two witnesses talked about in the Bible.
Right.
And so let me ask you, did that raise a red flag? Did you ever buy into that?
I did buy into it, but, you know, I didn't come there for that. It was just part of the doctrine. And, of course, I bought into it. You know, he wrote a book on it, and the book seemed to make sense at the time. But through the years, you started to realize, you know, man, a lot of this stuff is not lining up, you know. But what I was doing was just trying to make sure that in my life, just like many people there, they just wanted to keep Yahweh's laws. And even if they didn't understand stuff, they were told, look, if you don't understand, give it time, the understanding will come, but just keep, you know, being obedient, you know, and that's what the whole thing was. Be obedient, be obedient. And, you know, that's what I did. I was obedient. I just made sure I was doing what I was supposed to do. And it really didn't affect me in a negative way other than the fact that now that I look back on it, it was negative because I was being manipulated. I was under mind control. I had given him a tremendous amount of my income. I gave him my livelihood, you know, my time. I lost my homes that I built. It broke up my family. So at the end of it, of course, now I can look back and go, golly, how did I not see this the first year, you know? And I can't explain it. It's kind of just like people that join any organization, whether it be Mormons or, Scientology, which is other cults that I'm mentioning, Jehovah's Witnesses. They are doing good. They feel like they're doing good, but, I can look at them and say, hey, you guys are in a cult,
Yeah, I got
They don't see it, though. They think they're doing God's work,
Right. So you're there. You're trying to be, as you say, obedient. You're trying to have faith. You have an extraordinary amount of faith.
And you're constantly being fed that you're doing Yahweh's work. You know what I mean? And so that's all you realize is that through all this, everything you're doing is giving glory to Yahweh, And of course they use Yahweh instead of God. So for your listeners, in case they don't understand that.
No, I understand. So, but one of the bigger things that I was thinking, as you said, everybody's just trying to be obedient. They're trying to do their thing. The one thing that he did predict the end of the world. He did predict Armageddon. That was one of his things, and he basically
on more than one.
And then he basically went ahead and said, well, you know what, not quite. And I've actually been to a church where they had this thing through types and shadows and through numbers and whatnot. Right. They were able to prove when the second coming was going to be, and I was at a church like that, which is right. it is what it is. But I've seen that firsthand and what that means and how people will just go for it and buy into it, and then when the day comes close, or when the day comes, then it's like, oh well, you know what? This is what happens. Yeah. So when that happens, I mean, did you see a drastic reduction in members?
2006, and when that happened, I did start questioning. That's when I started to doubt what was going on, because it was the first time that he actually gave a date. Before that, it was always like, it may be this year. It may be 3 years from now, but this was like, he was saying, on September 12th, 2006, there's going to be nuclear war. No doubt about it. And when it came and passed and it didn't happen, I was like, okay, what's going on here, Yeah. And so it took me another year or two before I finally came to my senses, and left.
So did you see a drastic decline in members? Were people leaving?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people were leaving. That's the thing about his church. It's a constant revolving door. So he gets rid of members and he replaces them with new members, and it's constantly just revolving. There's still a few of the old timers there that were there like when I came and stuff, but they're far and few between. And most of them hold high positions now, and they've been basically kissing his rear end for half of their life. So they probably never will leave. Some of them.
Well, here's one of the things I was reading up on is that, obviously he wrote his book, The Nuclear Baby, things like this. He's predicting the end of the world. And from the research I've gathered, former members were stating that they were required to buy doomsday supplies from Mr. Hawkins' company.
Of course, yeah.
So he did, in fact, own a company where he was selling supplies that members bought.
Sure.
Wow. And so then he also owned multiple houses. How did the congregation feel about that?
Oh, he owns the research I did in 3 counties surrounding the church, which is Callahan, Taylor, and Jones County. He owns, at the time, 10 years ago, he owned $2.5 million worth of property.
And let me ask you, what was the congregation's response? I mean, did you speak to anybody? Was anybody kind of put off by that?
The congregation looked at anything that came negative against the house as persecution by the beastly system or the world. So if you were to sit down and have them on a radio interview with me right now, they would just say, Kepha's a disgruntled member, blah, 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 I mean, as much as I can present truth to them, even if they read the website I set up, themanbehindthename.com, they wouldn't believe it. They, in fact, most of them wouldn't even be able to read the whole site. They'd be like, this is a waste of time. He's just making up lies, and he's, whatever. He hates Yishmael Hawkins, and he's, they just, you make excuses is basically what happens. And you have to. If you don't make excuses, then you have to admit, that something's wrong. You know what I mean? And when you're in a delusion, you don't want to admit you're wrong. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to yourself. It's, it's weird. I mean, until something happens that wakes you up, especially when you've involved so much of your life and your time into something, it's like you don't want to see the truth that's really out there. You know what I mean?
This may be a little uncomfortable, and I'm just trying to get the truth here about the organization. Was there at all ever any elders that approached you about your children and taking marriage?
No. I didn't have. I mean, of course, I had young children. My two oldest boys were already married when I left. Yisrael Hawkins was trying to recruit, and I say try to recruit. He had one of my daughters working in the office with him and his other wives and concubines and stuff. And when I found out that they were trying to recruit her for marriage, I pulled her out of working in that office, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, in my case, no, I didn't have nobody approach me and try to arrange anything. Now, it does get done. It just didn't happen to me. I know that there's other people that have arranged marriages with their daughters to Yisrael Hawkins, and and I'm sure that that's probably some of that might have went on. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that actually being done across the board, I guess you could say.
What happened as far as the congregation and you yourself? What happened when the whole, Kay Hawkins found out that Yisrael Hawkins obviously had taken another wife? What was the congregation's reaction to that?
By the time Kay Hawkins found it, she already knew what her husband was. I mean, she wrote a book about it.
Right.
Which, she wrote it like 15 years later or so. I think she just wrote it about 3 years ago. But before I read the book, I didn't know all the intricate details of their life. But after I read her book, of course, she admitted she knew her husband was a womanizer since the day she met him. So as much as Kay Hawkins, I felt bad for her. After I read a book, I kind of felt like, well, wait a minute. She knew what he was. Why didn't she let us know? If she'd have let me know when I came, I probably wouldn't have stayed,
You feel like Kay Hawkins could have done a little bit more in that avenue?
Well, yeah, if she'd have had full disclosure, definitely I don't think the place would have built up like it did.
Sure, I understand. So he's been quoted as stating that, and this one's really got me, and I just want to hear your thoughts on it. He stated that global warming is being caused by STDs. You familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that to me, and again, I want to make sure that for everybody that's listening out there, this is, as Kepha said, this is slow progression. So this isn't something that, that where red flags would be coming up left and right. This is slow progression. It's mind control. It's manipulation. And so I don't want to make it sound like I'm being disrespectful to anyone involved in the organization. But when you come out and you say that global warming is being caused by STDs, to me, those are big red flags. And so when he started, when was it that you realized, wait a minute, something is definitely wrong, and I've got to figure a way out of this thing?
It was right around that time. That was right around 2005, 2006. That's what I'm saying. A lot of this stuff didn't start coming out till that time period, and I'd already been there for almost 20 years, So, yeah, when that started coming out, I was sitting there reading the books and trying to understand it, and it didn't make sense to me. But, you get to the type of point where you just go, okay, this don't make sense, but it's not pertinent to my salvation. In other words, my salvation was dependent upon how I live, how I act, how I conduct myself, whether I'm, doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. So all that other stuff was just, as much as I tried to accept it, and as an elder even tried to be a person that would say, okay, yeah, this is what we teach, and this is good, whatever. I didn't understand it. I don't think anybody there understands it, First of all, Yisrael Hawkins is not a scientist, so he doesn't know what's causing global warming. But he can write books on it and say anything he wants, and people there just buy it hook, line, and sinker, I was one. I'm not going to sit here and color-code it or sugar-coat it. I believed everything that was taught, because in order to be part of the organization, you have to be in unity with the doctrines. And you have to accept it. Even though behind closed doors, you're sitting there going, what the hell is this all about, you know? What does this got to do with me being a better person if STDs are causing global warming? You know what I mean?
Right.
No, I
So,
get what you're saying.
you know, you question it, but you also question it very privately. I mean, in other words, I would talk to my wives about it, and I would maybe talk to close friends, but I was very careful because if I started talking to the wrong people and they got back, well, that's when you start getting watched, you start getting blackballed, and eventually they'll kick you out. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So it's another fear tactic where you're scared to really speak your mind. And you know, it took me till 2008 before I actually spoke my mind. I finally got to the point where I said, you know what? And the thing was, what made me finally stand up is when Yedidia Yondersevitz got arrested for child molestation. And they tried to say that, oh, you know, he didn't do it, and it was a setup, and he's being persecuted. And me, I just went out and did a little investigation and tried to find out what the truth was. And when I found out that he was a child molester, that's when I left. That's when I said, all right, that's it. I didn't come here for shit like this, you know, excuse my language.
2008?
But I didn't, yeah, that was 2007, 2008, late 2007. Around October, November.
In regard to that, were those members children's?
It was his own stepdaughter.
Oh.
That he was accused of, and got, well, not accused, he went to jail for it, you know, whatever he did, I don't know all the details, he was using some kind of, what doctors use to inspect the inside of a woman with, they call them vaginal spectrums or something like that.
Right.
And, you know, he was doing that and who knows what else, I don't know. The guy's serving 30-year prison term, you know.
Yeah.
So he got what he deserved.
Oh yeah, most definitely. One of the things that Israel's been quoted for saying, he refers to chapter 7 of Revelations, states that Yahweh is holding back a nuclear baby, and that it will unleash around the Euphrates River. When in fact, if you research, you know, Revelations chapter 7, it doesn't state that at all. So, I mean, I gather, and the reason why I put this out there is I gather that you yourself, other members of this congregation, had probably behind closed doors started researching a lot of what he was saying as time progressed, and you started to get the idea something's definitely not right.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. In fact, when I left for about 2 years, and I came back. When I came back, I tried to explain to the elders, and I wrote like about a 15-page letter of why I left and why I was coming back, what I was trying to do. And I don't even know if all of them read it. I gave it to as many as I could, and they didn't care. I mean, when I came back after 2 years, I could tell people were looking at me really strangely, like, you know, what's he doing here and what's going on? And people that I'd known for 20 years didn't even come up and say hi. You know, so it took and when I came back for a purpose. I went back to try to see if I could straighten up this mess and see if we can get this organization back on track. And of course, you know, one person against, you know, 1,000, it didn't work because these 1,000 people are all brainwashed. And of course, Yisrael Hawkins, if he says anything, you know, against like me, in this case, like Kepha's lost his understanding, everybody believed it. You know what I mean?
But you still felt at the base of it all, the idea itself was still righteous. It was still a good organization as far as the idea of what it was supposed to be and what he sold.
Just some bad apples.
Well, let's put it this way. They got some good people there that came there for the same reasons I did. They wanted to change their lives for the best, to keep Yahweh's law as best as they could. And there's still quite a few there, I'm sure, you know, but through the years now, since I've left, a lot of people have left. In fact, they just had 2 or 3 elders that didn't show up at the last feast, from what I understood. So they're starting to really fall apart, you know. My first wife, she stayed there after I left, you know, and we got divorced, but she left about 1.5 years ago too. And I found out through the grapevine that some of the women don't even know that she left. I mean, that's how they cover stuff up. You know what I mean? They think she's just out doing missionary work or something.
Wow. So it took her almost, 10 years to actually get up and go after all that?
It took her about 7 years after I left before she finally, realized this was not the life she wanted to have,
I hear you. And I was reading something that it actually kind of broke my heart. I was reading it, on your website itself. The one biggest thing that stuck out to me was that it shows here that your two oldest sons are still involved in the organization. They're still. Do you have any contact with them at all?
My second to youngest, which is the two oldest, but I'm saying the 30-year-old, 31-year-old, he hasn't talked to me in about 6 years. We haven't had a decent conversation other than I saw him a while back and tried to talk to him, and he was so rude to me. It was like, the hatred was just oozing out of him, because I'm considered a fall away. I'm the devil, I'm the son of Satan in his eyes. But my other son, we communicate and we talk on the phone, my oldest one, and we have at least contact, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've obviously got family members that are still involved in the organization.
Sure. I've got grandchildren that they don't even know me,
Wow. So how does that work? I mean, as far as the compound itself, I mean, it's obviously gated and, is there, you obviously had a structure, but as you said, as time progressed and the members were growing, they started getting RVs and trailers and things of that nature. And so, how is the food supply and things of that nature? I mean, are people, are they eating regularly? What does that look like?
Man, I tell you what, if you saw those people, you'd think they were a bunch of homeless people. They dress, just so raggedy. Most of them, their teeth are rotting out their mouth because they don't go to the dentist. They eat whatever they're told to eat by him, and so most of them are either overweight because they're eating greasy foods and soft drinks. And the ones that do go on these health kicks that he always promotes, a lot of them have died. They got their own graveyard that they bury people in, So the older ones die off, and the younger ones, they just, it's almost like the food he's feeding them creates an insanity in them or a brainwashed delusion where they just follow him. It's almost like I'm wondering if maybe he's doing something to the food, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, definitely I can see from research and so forth that poverty exists there, except for if you're Yisrael Hawkins. Is Yisrael Hawkins still, what is his status today?
He's still a witness for them. He's still their king and their savior, their witness, their pastor. They had idolized the guy.
Right, and so nobody obviously that's there sees him as a false prophet. They see him as a savior of sorts, as you said. Is that accurate?
That's it. It takes years. I mean, even when I left, it took me a couple of years to realize that he's not one of Yahweh's witnesses or a righteous man. I mean, I just was thinking, well, maybe he's disillusioned or he's just fallen into sin and he doesn't realize what he's doing. Until I started reading about narcissistic personalities and sociopathic personalities and psychotic personalities, then I realized, whoa, wait a minute. This guy is actually fits the bill, and they don't really care about nobody except what their goal is, which is, in his case, is money, control, power, women.
You got out in 2008. You left with your second wife, who you met in the organization or on the compound.
Yes.
And since then, how has the transition back into, so to speak, regular life been for you guys?
It's been good. Let's see. I'd say the first 2 years I had a hard time making decisions. In other words, you're so used to getting counsel and talking to other elders before you make decisions. And so I had to basically be a man and say, wait a minute, I've got to make decisions, and whether they're right or wrong, whether I should buy this car or do that. You know what I'm saying? I didn't have nobody to talk to about it. I just did it on my own, because most of my family's, either dead or I don't have contact with some of my, relatives that I haven't seen in 30 years, But so I didn't really have anybody to fall back on, and that was the hardest part, because that's one thing when you go there, you cut off all ties with everyone, You cut off ties with family, you cut off ties with friends, you move away from where you grew up. So I've reconnected with a lot of them, which has been great, but that was the hardest thing, was just trying to make decisions and make sure I'm doing the right thing in life decisions, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I look at it, there's two types of people when you leave a church or a cult like that, is that, as I look back on it, what happens is, like in my case, I had a 20-year span of my life there. So what I did was I basically rebooted back to the day I came in there. In other words, I was looking for truth, so I went back to what I was doing, looking for truth. So when I left, I'd say the first 5 years, I had my nose in them scriptures, and I had my nose in studying and trying to figure out where I went wrong. How did I wind up in this cult? How did I fall into such a trap? And where did why did I go down that path, And so I just started doing a lot of studying and trying to figure out the proper interpretation of the scriptures rather than believing Yisrael Hawkins' interpretation. I went back to the source of, I took a trip to Israel. I met with rabbis. I met a rabbi here I went and saw Rabbi Tobias Singer down in Houston a couple of years ago and just asked him a bunch of questions and was able to get on the phone and talk to different people that kind of gave me a perspective that made sense, And then I started to realize, I started to dig into Yisrael Hawkins' teachings, and I realized now that I had a little bit more knowledge, I could see through the mistakes. I could see all the lies. Because before that, I thought that we had all the truth when we were there. That the house of Yahweh was the truth, and what we were being taught was the truth, and that the Bible interpretations were the truth. And then when I started to see that, first of all, the guy doesn't know Hebrew. So here he is. He's produced his own Bible. He's produced books and books and books, where he goes into details of interpretation using, Hebrew lexicons and all these different things, which looks on the surface like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. But when you get with someone that really knows biblical Hebrew and they start pointing out the mistakes, then you realize, wow, he's using this stuff, but he's misusing it because he really doesn't know what he's doing, And that helped me a lot, especially in translation and interpretation of certain scriptures. Like even the two witnesses. He uses his name and his brother as being the two witnesses, but when you start taking it into perspective of how the scriptures were written in that book of Isaiah and stuff, then you start to see that, wait a minute, there's no way, this is just ridiculous. How could I even believe that, Or, just different things, of interpreting certain scriptures, especially the ones that he used. Like his biggest scripture that he does to set himself apart from not only Christianity and Judaism, but even through the Sacred Name movement, is that he says that the word El or Elohim is a pagan word, and that which in English El is translated God. And so he said that and the Jews use the term El and Elohim because it's a Hebrew word, Aleph Lamed, it's in the scriptures. But he said that the scribes and the translators, the original was always just Yahweh. It wasn't no El and Elohim. So that's a big doctrine of his that kind of stumps people and makes them think, wow, this really is the place because we're the only ones that do it. And he is the only one that does basically teach that the El and Elohim is a pagan term, but he's wrong. Because in the Hebrew, especially the ancient scrolls that they've been able to dig up, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and even the Masoretic text, the word El and Elohim is in it. And the way they write those scrolls, they don't make mistakes. If they write those scrolls, especially in the times of old, if they made a mistake, they didn't erase them, they didn't blot them out. They burnt the scroll and started over again. So it was a very, very timely process. It was very intricate and detailed, and people today just don't understand how detailed it was and how meticulously and how exact the scriptures were that were written in Hebrew, And it took me studying to realize that. I just didn't know that, I mean, because we were never encouraged to read other materials or read other people's works. We were told just read House of Yahweh stuff. Yisrael Hawkins, he can interpret it. Just believe what he interprets. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so that's why nobody can ever figure out what's going on, because you're discouraged from studying other materials and other works out there. So once I left, I was free, man. I was a free moral agent to really see what's out there and see what's going on. And that was the thing that causes the biggest problem with these people that are deceived, is that his interpretations are so screwed up that he can make them fit whatever he wants, and they buy it hook, line, and sinker,
I hear you.
And it doesn't line up though with scholarly reviews. There's scholars that would sit there and laugh at his work. They'd read the first page of his book and go, I don't even need to go any further. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You know what I mean?
I hear you. Let me ask you a question, Kepha. With one of the things that stuck out to me most in regards to your website, the manbehindthename.com. I was looking at it here. What exactly, if you could explain just real briefly, the Great White Buffalo God?
Yeah. Well, let's see. It must have been around 2003, 4, somewhere around there. Yisrael Hawkins, okay, someone came to him and told him about the white buffalo. That it's a sacred animal with certain Indian tribes. And what's interesting is when he was born, his name was Buffalo Bill Hawkins. Okay? Uh-huh. So he took this and he showed that he was the white buffalo. In other words, that he was the prophecy of this white buffalo. Even though the Lakota Indians and that say that it's supposed to be a woman, he said no, that he was the white buffalo.
Had nothing to do with Hebrew at all.
No, nothing to do with Hebrew at all. It's actually Indian culture.
Right.
In fact, if you research it, it goes back to Egyptian religion.
Sure. And, well, even on the gate to the property, there's a white buffalo, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So he kind of made that his emblem. That was his insignia. He's the white buffalo, and of course everybody took it and ran with it. I mean, even I did at the time until I left and realized, wait a minute, what am I doing here? They got all these buffaloes everywhere. It's like we're worshiping idols,
Well, the Bible. I mean, the Bible speaks to a lot of what was going on there.
Oh, definitely. I mean, but like I said, when you're there,
well, yeah.
And that's why I have a hard time criticizing most of the people there, because I was just as deceived, and I can't blame anyone or point fingers. Other than certain hierarchy, people in the hierarchy that I know now after realizing what was going on, who are definitely evil and who are hiding, pedophilia or anything that's illegal and unlawful and definitely immoral, That's one thing I tried to never do, was to get involved in anything that, I can speak for myself. I didn't encourage it. I definitely did not hide it or try to cover it up. And you see, even though I was there a long time, when I was there, especially the last, say, 10 years, I had a job, I was working, and, my focus was on just supporting my family and living my life. I wasn't never ever a worker for the House of Yahweh where I was living on $25 a week or something like that. So he didn't have control over me in that aspect. You see, when people dedicate themselves, they have to make a vow, and they work for the House of Yahweh, which basically they're working for Yisrael Hawkins, and they can't make decisions on their own. They can't say, well, I'm going to go do this or that. If they do, then they get blackballed and eventually either get kicked out or they just be or humiliated. They're made to look like they're a bunch of rebellious members.
Yeah, but see, that's in my opinion, that's how the enemy works. He embodies this, and he basically puts out this example of any type of righteous religious group or any type of Christianity that turns people, the masses, off to it. I mean, it's the same thing with the Westboro Baptist Church. This huge example of what Christianity is supposed to be, the most popular example, I think, to this day right now, and all the horrendous things that they do, all of that stuff, and that's what the general populace sees. That's what everybody sees when it comes down to, these are these crazy Christians. I mean, it goes way past Bible thumping. It goes way past Saturday morning knock on your door.
It's a control mechanism. It's a feeling of empowerment. And I think that Yisrael Hawkins, 100%, feels empowered by these people that are feeding off of him. You know,
Most definitely.
the one thing that you know is unfortunate is that I know that compound has a lot of good people that are seeking the truth. You know, and I feel like, you know, and you tell me, because you'd be better speak to it than I would. At the end of the day, are their souls saved? Do they believe in Jesus Christ? Do they believe that he is the way to God the Father? Because the Bible is very clear that Jesus Christ is the only way, and I'll repeat that a million times, the only way to God the Father. Do they believe that?
Yeah, they do. They believe in well, of course, they call him Yahshua.
Sure.
And they do believe that he's a sacrifice and that, you know, he died for their sins and all that. But, you know, I believe in their heart just like even, well, they're a corrupted version of Christianity because in their basis is they really are Christians, but they're trying to be something different, you know?
A lot of people would say, you know, well, and this is just would be my opinion, my response, but a lot of people would say, well, who are you to judge the house of Yahweh? And you believe in the Bible, you know, they could be judging, people could be judging you for believing in the Bible. And what I'll say is, in my opinion, I don't take another man's religion and then pervert it. I don't take another man's religion and add to it. I look at the scripture for the Bible for what it is because I believe in the Bible.
Sure.
And you know, I grew up Southern Baptist. So whatever is in those scriptures, you better believe that's what Southern Baptists believe. I'm non-denominational today. But what I would say to those people, I don't take another man's religion and distort that religion and form my own around it. And that is exactly what the house of Yahweh has done.
Sure. Well, you know what I tell people that tell me that? I tell them, so what, do you have a problem with judgment? I mean, come on. Judgment is necessary. Everybody, I mean, look, when you go, if you do something in society today, you go before a judge, don't you?
Right.
You know? So there's nothing wrong with judgment. You know, God expects righteous judgment. He expects us to judge righteously. But how do we judge when we're talking about something like the house of Yahweh? We're judging them according to their works. In other words, what are they really doing? What are they really following? Are they following what God says? And at the end of the day, no, they're not. So their judgment is, in my eyes, and what I've gathered through my investigation and being there for 20 years, is that they are a religious cult that are so far from the scriptures, even though they use the scriptures and they quote them and they, you know, write books about it, their works is dead. You know what I mean? In other words, there's nothing that they're producing that I would call edible fruit, you know, righteous fruit. In other words, the fruits of the Spirit. They don't have love. They don't have compassion. They don't have kindness. They may have amongst themselves, but it's all a facade. It's not even for real. You know what I mean? Like for me, I was there for 20 years. I made friends with people. My children grew up with their children. I spent 20 years with certain people, and when I left, not one of them called me. Not one of them said, man, Kepha, what's going on, man? I've known you for 20 years, and you're a reasonable, logical guy. You're an elder here. You're a judge. You know, your wife is a head judge and a deaconess and all this. You know what I mean? They knew my reputation. My reputation was flawless. But not one called me. You know why? Because Yisrael Hawkins has them convinced that if someone leaves or gets kicked out, you are not to have nothing to do with them. And if you do, then you're going to be just as guilty as them and they'll kick you out. So people were scared. You know what I mean?
Do you think that he will ever predict another doomsday?
Oh, of course he will. Especially right now with North Korea, I'm sure he's biting a bit, hoping for a nuclear war so he can say, you see, I told you.
Right, you say something long enough, eventually it happens, and all of a sudden...
Exactly.
All of a sudden you were the prophet that made it right, you know?
Well, you know, it's like saying, let's say your grandma's 80 years old and you start telling people, grandma's going to die, you know? Oh, grandma's going to die. When she dies, you see, I told you she was going to die. There was a guy that said that on that used to be a member, and it sticks with me because it's true. If you say something long enough and something happens, well, you see, I told you, even though he was wrong 30 times before, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually watched that interview. It was pretty interesting. And he was one of the members that had an issue with elders approaching him for his daughter.
And he had land.
Yeah,
he had land
did.
too. I believe that he had land that the church obtained from him.
He finally sold it to, I think, probably Yishvil Hawkins or someone in my members, because he lived right outside the compound. And he's another person that his family, just he wound up, I think, divorcing his wife. It just, a lot of people when they leave, man, the effect of being there just destroys everything. I mean, when they leave, a lot of them get divorced, and their family splits up, and it's just.
So
it's not. That's what I'm saying. It's not really. If this was truly God's house and truly a place, you wouldn't see all this stuff going on. You wouldn't see child molestation and people getting arrested and elders and people leaving and families broken up and people divorcing. I mean, they got such a high rate of divorce there. It's probably about as bad as being out here in the world. You know what I mean?
Well, when you left, can you walk me through? I mean, how did you try to get your first wife, your family, or had that fallen through? How did that happen?
Yeah, if you could just.
Well, when I left, I told both my wives, I said, I'm leaving. I am getting out of here. At the time, what had happened was Yishvil Hawkins got arrested. He was going to be charged with bigamy, and my name got attached to it. So I came home one evening from work, and on TV it's saying Keith Arsamont, they didn't have a warrant out, but they had something filed, and they actually mentioned me on TV, and I was like, what? Wait a minute, what's going on here? I said, I'm not going to go to jail over having two wives. That's ridiculous. So I packed up my bags, and I said, of course, I was already ready to go pretty much, but that was the key that got me awakened. I was like, wait a minute. And the thing is, I knew that Yishvil would not cover my back and stand up for me. He wasn't going to hire no lawyer. He wasn't going to do anything to help me. You know what I mean?
Of course not.
And of course, I was thinking, you know what? The scripture says when you see trouble, you flee, you leave that city. So I basically grabbed about 10 suitcases, went to Walmart, bought a few more. I think I had 13 suitcases, filled them with clothes. I went to both my wives separately. I went to the first one. I said, I'm leaving. I said, I don't know if I'm coming back. I don't know what's going on, but I'm getting out of here. And she said, well, I'm staying. And then I went to my second wife. She goes, I'm going with you. So she hopped in the vehicle. We packed it up and we left.
So why do you think that one was more willing to go versus the other? What was the power influence?
Well, my first wife worked for the House of Yahweh. She had volunteered there for years and years, and she was high up. She had a really great position there. She was well respected by all the women, and it had gotten to her head. She was very loyal to Yishvil Hawkins, and I think she looked at it like, well, I'm not going to leave my children. I'm not going to just walk away from all this. Where me, I was like, man, I'm walking away from it. This is not important to me. What's important is my children and my wife. But, through the years, my first wife, we had started to separate, for many reasons. Me, I was, with this polygamy thing, I was thinking about maybe taking other wives, and she didn't like that. I never did, but I was thinking about it, and I talked about it. And then also, because she was in the work, there was things she wouldn't tell me, so she was very secretive, and that's how he separates people. And behind my back, he was counseling her, and he was steering her away from me, you know what I mean? So he stole her loyalty from me. She was no longer loyal to me as a wife, and that showed by her not leaving, Well, and of course, once I left, it was maybe about 6-8 months later, she called me and said maybe she was wanting to, I say maybe, she said she was thinking of leaving, and I said, well, I'm out here, I'm living, I'm barely making it, I'm running around trying to figure out what to do. And I said, what about the boys? I said, I think it's best if you just stay there a little longer. Well, I kind of kicked myself in the butt in some ways, because I probably should have just said, go ahead and leave and come on out, But after that, it just, there was no more of a relationship, being gone for as long as I did. When I did come back 2 years later, there just it wasn't a husband and wife relationship anymore. It was more like a brother and a sister. You know what I mean? I looked at her more like I cared about her in the fact that like a sister. I didn't love her as a wife anymore, and that's a shame, because, that's what the House of Yahweh did to our marriage. Yishvil Hawkins with his polygamy and all his doctrinal teachings on, turning husbands against wives, wives against husbands, and children against parents, and so on and so forth. So, and in her case, by being involved in the work and she was Yishmael Hawkins's counseled a lot of his wives. So she had dug herself into a lot of holes that was hard to get out. And you know what I mean? She had done things that she probably shouldn't have done. And I don't really want to discuss it on air because as it is right now, we still have 2 children together, but we don't talk. She's going on with her life and I'm going on with mine. And if she was to hear this, I'm sure she would probably want to say something different about it because I'm trying to be truthful, but at the same time,
we respect that. And let me do this. Let me thank you and let me plug your website for everybody that's listening. Kepha has wrote a ton of information on his website where you can learn more just about the devastation, the lies, the deceitfulness. It is called www.themanbehindthename.com. And you can also reach out and contact him just the same as we've done. And I really got to say, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on the show and step up to the plate because, man, have you done that in so many ways. You've said, look, man, I got down a path that it's not the righteous path. I see that, but I'm man enough to step up and speak out against it. And you've actually done more than just that. And I got to give you a lot of credit for that, brother. I really do.
Well, I appreciate that, man. It's definitely been a dangerous thing to do because that place, there's people that have been killed under strange circumstances, and I'm very well aware how dangerous they are.
Right.
I do trust in God too, but I also use my sensibilities and common sense, and they're dangerous. They're that dangerous. If he put out a hit on me, there is no doubt that people would try to kill me, I'm not saying he is, but I'm just saying there have been other people that I know that have died. I've tried to investigate it, and I even put some of it on my website that they died under very strange circumstances, And so it's a dangerous place. I realized what I did was, dangerous for me and my family, but I felt like I owed people something, because there's a lot of people there that respected me, people through the years that knew me. And I just felt if I was an elder and I held a position and I was supposed to be bringing forth the truth, I wanted them to know that if I can do anything to help them, I'm going to help anybody that may think about coming there. This is what's going on there. You know what I mean? Absolutely. In other words, before you step into the house of Yahweh, you read their site, you read their information, fine. But read mine so you can get an open perspective on everything. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, and that's what you're doing now. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to just share our walk with Christ, how we deal with the devil's world. And you're obviously now spreading the word. You're obviously doing what you can now. I mean, regardless of what happened, you're doing it now, and that's the point. So what we like to do, and I hope this is okay with you, we'd like to go ahead and just, if you would like to be involved, we're going to do it either way, to go ahead and just close with a little quick prayer, if that's all right with you.
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. All right, so, in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Kepha, Glenn here, and we're just trying to go ahead and spread the word of this house of Yahweh, Lord. We're just trying to actually ask you, Lord, just kind of lift Kepha up and just keep his strength alive, keep his direction, and keep his focus as he's trying to expose this, Lord, this false prophet that's out there. Lord, I just also want to pray for all the people that are just caught up on it still, people that are out there at the compound that just don't know really what's going on and are afraid to really actually admit that they don't believe in everything that's being told. Lord, if you just kind of give them the strength to kind of persevere, move forward, Lord, and get up out of there, Lord, so we can just get their salvation on the right track, Lord. And as far as we go, so if you just keep us trucking, Lord, and just get this thing going. And your righteous name, Father God, in Jesus Christ's name we pray, Lord. Amen.
Now here on earth as is above, oh, give to us our daily bread, and keep our hungry spirits fed. May all our satisfaction be in you, whose grace has set us free. Give us hope, give us faith, help us trust in your guidance. From the depths of your grace you have richly provided. Thank you,